Chapter 4. The words hung heavy between them, a disquieting pall smothering the once jovial atmosphere. "A transfer?" Matak echoed, his brow furrowing. "To where precisely?" Vesk met his questioning gaze with a careful neutrality that did little to mask the faint discomfort lurking behind his gruff facade. When he spoke, his tone carried an undercurrent of finality, as if the matter brooked no further discussion. "An outpost facility on Zarim 7. You'll be debriefed on the specifics once you arrive." Matak felt Akamai shifting anxiously against his shoulder, as if the little creature sensed the discordant undercurrents rippling through the exchange. He reached up to give his pet a calming stroke, pondering his superior's words through a lens of deepening unease. Something wasn't right here. None of this tracked with established protocol or chain of command. Transfers of such magnitude required extensive paperwork, formal approval processes, transition periods for knowledge handover. Yet here Vesk stood, decreeing this sudden reassignment with all the heavy-handed ambiguity of a tribunal's verdict, as if the decision had been unilaterally rendered from on high, leaving no room for discourse or appeal. The implications cast a pall over Matak's instincts, setting off silent alarms deep within his analytical mind. This reeked of something other than a routine personnel shift, of ulterior motives and shadowed machinations swirling beneath the surface. Could it be related to his recent discoveries? The forbidden caches and trespassing strangers glimpsed in those restricted zones. A knot of dread coiled in the pit of his stomach, lent further credence by Akamai's escalating agitation. Clearly the little creature sensed the imminent peril too, its trilling whimpers betraying a preternatural apprehension of the events unfolding around them. Matak found himself wishing, not for the first time, that his companion could speak, to give voice to the vague forebodings sounding silent warnings within. Oblivious to his inner turmoil, Vesk pressed on in that same gruff, dismissive tone. "You'll be departing within the next cycle, so get your personal effects in order. We'll see you off with a proper send-off before you go." The words rang hollow, devoid of sincerity or warmth. An empty formality trotted out as a matter of protocol rather than sentiment. Still, Matak found himself swept along by their inexorable current, nodding his reluctant acceptance as 1,000 lingering questions burned behind his eyes. What awaited him on this Zarim 7th? Some remote outpost, isolated and inhospitable by the sound of things. Certainly no mere routine reassignment, but rather a carefully calculated gambit, either to remove him from the colony's operations entirely or... The unvoiced fear went unspoken, too terrible to give voice. But its insidious tendrils had taken root, blossoming into a pervasive dread that would not be denied. They meant to silence him. Permanently. The realization struck with a sickening certainty, casting all of Vesk's brusque words and deflections into harsh relief. This was no transfer, but an intricately orchestrated deception, a means to be rid of him without prompting further unrest or scrutiny. A cold knot of anger and resignation warred within him, tempered only by Akamai's plaintive whimpers as the little creature sensed his escalating distress. Pulling his companion close, Matak willed himself to exude an outward facade of calm acceptance, even as his mind raced. Escape would be impossible here, not without drawing unwanted attention. Better to play along for now, to feign compliance until what? Until he reached this so-called outpost and whatever grim fate awaited there. His jaw clenched at the unbidden thought. No, he would not resign himself so easily. There had to be a way to turn the tables, to somehow gain the upper hand and wrest back control of the situation. He was Matak the 14th, an Indrilum whose ingenuity and resourcefulness flowed as ceaseless as breath itself. Escape was never off the table, not so long as his mind remained unshackled. Akamai seemed to sense the renewed determination steadying his resolve. The little creature's whimpers faded, replaced by an attentive stillness, as if awaiting his next move. United they stood, an unbreakable dyad in the face of the shadowed storm gathering on the horizon. Let the pretenders make their play, then. He would meet deception with deception, playing along until the pivotal moment to strike. When the trap was finally sprung, it would be he who emerged triumphant, and woe to those who underestimated the lengths to which he would go to secure his freedom. The dull roar of idle conversation and clattering dinnerware swirled around them, a stark contrast to the focused intensity gripping Martak's thoughts. Across the cramped confines of the commissary, knots of colonists and personnel clustered together in tight groups, chatting and laughing over plates of simple but hearty fare. To the casual observer, it would seem nothing more than a typical communal meal period, just another in a ceaseless cycle of such reprieves carved out amidst the rigours of daily routine. Yet the strained smiles and forced levity pervading the atmosphere hinted at an underlying current of tension, of unspoken apprehension thrumming like a taut cord pulled to the breaking point. For this was no ordinary gathering of co-workers and compatriots. It was a farewell, an impromptu send-off for one of their own, bidding him off to parts unknown with the finality of a funeral march. Surreptitious glances kept darting his way, their owners quickly averting their gazes whenever he chanced to meet their scrutiny, head-on. A hushed pall descended with each aborted murmur or stilted exchange, as if the very air lay leaden with unvoiced misgivings. They knew. Of course they knew, even if the precise details remained obscured behind a veil of plausible deniability. This entire charade was little more than a hollow pantomime, going through the motions of tradition, while the bitter truth lingered in every weighted pause, every sidelong look of pity or thinly veiled suspicion. A mirthless smile played across Martak's features as he surveyed the proceedings through narrowed eyes. Let them have their mummery, their hollow farewells, and forced conviviality. It mattered little in the greater calculation. By this time tomorrow the pretense would shatter, the carefully constructed facade crumbling to reveal the harsh realities that lay beyond. He would finally glimpse the full extent of the game being played, the stakes for which he'd been made an unwitting gambit. The prospect should have filled him with dread, a creeping horror at the uncertainty looming ahead. Yet instead, Martak found his thoughts cleared by a strange sense of fatalistic determination. Whatever awaited on the other side of this grand deception no longer mattered, only that he greet it with the full breadth of his wits and resolve. He was an Indrelum, forged from a lineage of warriors, thinkers, and survivors. Adversity was a crucible to be embraced, not feared. It would test his mettle, separate the chaff of complacency from the hardened steel of his spirit. Beside him, Akamai stirred restlessly, as if sensing the iron resolution settling over his thoughts. Martak reached out to give the little creature a reassuring stroke, drawing comfort from the familiar gesture even as his gaze drifted back outwards. There, clustered at the periphery amidst the crowd of gawkers and well-wishers, a handful of faces he recognized, co-workers and subordinates shuffling about with transparent discomfort, writ large in their stilted movements and sidelong glances. Did they know the extent of the charade being played? Were they merely pawns swept along by the machinations of their masters, or complicit collaborators in whatever duplicitous schemes were being woven around him? Their shifting eyes seemed to slide away from his scrutiny, offering no answers. Just more layers of obfuscation to peel away, more tangled webs of potential deception in which to ensnare the unwary. Perhaps that was their gambit, to seed the field with a patchwork of feints and false trails, baffling his attempts to discern their true motives until he found himself hopelessly ensnarled. A wry twist played across his lips at the notion, his earlier resolve sharpening into a diamond edge of cold focus. Let them sow their webs of misdirection and deceit. He would navigate them all with the unerring precision of a surgeon TM's incisions, laying bare the heart of whatever grand deceptions were being spun. Already his keen intellect cycled through contingencies and scenarios, analysing potential vectors of egress and escape. Whatever endgame awaited at this mysterious outpost, he would greet it on his terms, the master of his own fate, not a hapless pawn to be sacrificed on the whims of shadowed players. The realization brought with it a strange sense of, not calm, precisely, but grim determination. This entire elaborate ruse had one fundamental flaw, one they could never account for, no matter how intricately they wove their snares. They underestimated him. His resourcefulness, his capacity for adaptation and improvisation in the face of even the most dire circumstances. He was Martak, the 14th, an Indrelum dynamo of innovation and resolve. And he would not be caged, would not be silenced or neutralized, not without one hell of a fight. The thought resonated through him like a cosmic inevitability, shoring his resolve as the garish festivities played on around him. Let the revellers have their hollow celebrations, their transparent deceptions. It would all be rendered moot soon enough. By this time on the morrow, a new game would be afoot, one of his own devising, where the rules and stakes bent to his mastery alone, and woe to any who mistook his quiet intensity for complacency. This was far from over. In fact, it was only just beginning. The hangar's prefab walls seemed to press in from all sides, enclosing Matak in a tomb-like stillness, broken only by the faint whisper of recycled air and the distant murmurs of muted activity. A stark, almost clinical austerity pervaded every nook and shadow, as if the entire environment had been meticulously scrubbed of anything extraneous or distracting. All except for the angular silhouette dominating the hangar's core like a brooding monolith. The transport craft squatted amid pools of harsh artificial light, its gunmetal hull reflecting sterile luminance in fractured kaleidoscope patterns. To Matak's assessing gaze, it seemed to radiate a palpable aura of cold menace, as if daring any to dare set foot within its foreboding confines. Perhaps that was merely his imagination, grafting portents onto inanimate steel, his subconscious giving visceral form to the vague sense of dread knotting his insides. Or perhaps his instincts were simply that, keenly honed, detecting the auras of potential peril with a preternatural sensitivity. Either way, the sight of that implacable metal leviathan sent a shudder racing down his spine, a frisson of ice-veined trepidation that had even Akamai huddling tight against the crook of his neck. The little creature's wary tremors seemed to mirror his own burgeoning disquiet, their shared unease feeding into a rising cyclone of deeply seated misgivings. This was it then, the pivotal juncture where mummery and obfuscation fell away, giving way to the cold, hard reality awaiting on the other side. No more sidelong glances or hollow farewells. No more feints or carefully constructed deceptions. From this point on, the path led inexorably towards whatever harsh contingencies the future held in store, be they grim fate or defiant triumph. Part of him had harboured a faint, naive hope that the entire subterfuge would prove naught but an elaborate test of his resolve, a gauntlet to overcome before being welcomed back into the fold with due honours. That fleeting fantasy had borne him through the interminable final hours on the colony, sustaining him through each awkward encounter and leaden farewell. Now, standing before that angular metal beast with its ominous emptiness yawning before him, reality could no longer be denied. Whatever lay ahead was no hypothetical trial, but a harsh new existence being imposed upon him, one from which escape grew more imperative with each shuddering inhalation. All his earlier bravado, his stoic resolve to face whatever awaited with unflinching determination. It bled away in those breathless moments, sublimating into a gnawing core of cold, primal dread. The weight of potential perils yet to be faced pressed down like a shroud, harrowing in its immensity. What fresh horrors might lurk on the other side of that dark moor? What cruel tribulations or torments devised by unseen foes who'd already demonstrated their cunning ruthlessness? The permutations multiplied with each passing heartbeat, manifold possibilities spawning new dread-fueled offshoots to paralyze his thoughts. Unbidden, his mind lurched back to those panicked figures glimpsed fleeing from the sealed access-way, shades of dread omen now given flesh in this very moment. Were they the architects of whatever dire endgame loomed ahead, or merely pawns like himself, ensnared by machinations beyond their comprehension? The uncertainty gnawed at him, eroding his composure with each fresh, unanswered query. He was Martak the 14th, celebrated for his ingenuity and steadfast resolve. Yet in the face of such implacable dread, all his lauded qualities seemed to wither, leaving only a hollow husk gripped by the bleakest augurs of primal terror. Then Akamai stirred against his neck, the little creature's warmth and solidity grounding him back to the present like an anchor amid the roiling tides of his own doubt. Instinctively, he reached up to give his stalwart companion a reassuring stroke, drawing strength from the familiar texture and resolute steadiness his pet exuded. No, he would not succumb so easily. Not while he had this bastion of loyalty and trust anchoring him through the tempest. Akamai was more than a mere domesticated novelty. They were partners bound by an inviolable trust, an unbreakable symbiosis that transcended mere survival instincts. As long as they were together, as long as he could draw upon that reservoir of kinship and fortitude, he would endure. Would overcome whatever fresh tribulations awaited on the other side of that ominous threshold. Gathering his scattered focus, Matak forced himself to meet that yawning metal aperture head-on, no longer cowering from its baleful glare, but facing it with renewed determination burning in his eyes. There would be no more indulging his baser misgivings, no more fleeting fanciers of cowering before looming threats. Whatever lay ahead, he would confront it as only an Indrelum could, with grit-forged resolve and the boundless ingenuity that was his birthright. He was Matak the 14th, an indomitable dynamo of innovation and problem-solving, and he would not be so easily cowed or shaken. Not while his inviolable bond with Akamai persisted. Not while the fires of defiance yet burned in his spirit. Squaring his shoulders, Martak turned to face the shadowed aperture, beckoning oblivion made manifest in that silent metal womb. And as the dread portal yawned open to receive him, he made himself a silent vow. Whatever fresh tribulations awaited on that inbound trajectory, he would face them unflinching. If oblivion sought to claim him, it had best be prepared for one hell of a fight.